It was 2:47 a.m. when I heard footsteps in my kitchen, but I lived alone. I remember the exact time because I'd been staring at my phone screen for what felt like hours, scrolling through nothing in particular, the blue light painting my bedroom walls in that sickly glow that comes with insomnia. October 31st had bled into November 1st without ceremony, and I'd spent Halloween doing what I always did, ignoring it. No decorations, no candy, no costume parties or carved pumpkins. At 32 years old, I'd convinced myself I was beyond all that theatrical nonsense. The footsteps weren't loud. That's what made them worse. They were soft, deliberate, the sound of someone trying very hard not to be heard. The old hardwood in my kitchen has always been a betrayer of secrets. Every step produces a distinctive creak, a groan of wood, against nail, against subfloor. I knew those sounds intimately. I'd walked across that floor thousands of times in the 3 years since I'd moved into the rental house on Blackwood Avenue. These footsteps were mine, or rather, they sounded exactly like mine. I sat up in bed, my chest tight, listening. The house had settled into its usual nighttime orchestra. The hum of the refrigerator, the occasional tick of cooling pipes, the whisper of wind against the windows. But there, underneath it all, came another creak, then another. Someone was walking from the sink toward the back door, following the exact path I took every morning when I made coffee. My first thought wasn't terror. It was confusion, that strange, floating sensation of being half asleep, half awake, where reality feels negotiable. Maybe I'd left the TV on, maybe it was the neighbor's house, maybe I was dreaming. I ran through these possibilities like a mental checklist, each one a small barrier against the truth pressing against my consciousness. I lived on a dead-end street in a quiet suburb of Portland. The house was a 1970s ranch style, nothing special, with a kitchen that opened onto a small backyard enclosed by a 6-foot privacy fence. I'd chosen it specifically for its isolation. After my divorce, I'd wanted space, silence, the ability to exist without witnesses. The nearest neighbor was Mrs. Chen, a 70-something widow who went to bed at 8 o'clock every night without fail. Beyond her house, there was only forest. Another creak, this one closer, near the kitchen doorway that led to the hall, near my bedroom. I reached for my phone, my hands trembling just slightly, and pulled up the home security app I'd installed 6 months earlier. 2 cameras, one covering the front porch, one covering the backyard. I'd been meaning to install an interior one, but had never gotten around to it. The front porch feed showed nothing but the orange glow of the streetlight and the scattered leaves the wind had pushed against the steps. The backyard was a rectangle of darkness. The motion sensor light remained off. The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. It had weight, presence, like something was actively creating it. I sat there in my bed, barely breathing, listening with every cell in my body. My bedroom door was open. I always slept with it open. And from where I sat, I could see a sliver of the hallway. The nightlight I kept plugged in near the bathroom cast a weak yellow glow, just enough to reveal the shapes of things. The corner of the hallway table, the edge of a picture frame, the beginning of the kitchen entrance. That's when I saw the shadow. It moved across the wall just for a moment. A dark shape that stretched and contracted as if someone had walked past the nightlight. But the angle was wrong. The shadow moved from left to right, which meant someone would have had to be walking from the kitchen toward the bedrooms. Toward me. I'd like to say I did something brave, that I grabbed a weapon, called the police, confronted the intruder, but fear doesn't work that way. It freezes you. It turns your muscles to stone and your thoughts to static. I sat there, my phone clutched in my hand, my breath caught somewhere between my lungs and my throat, and I waited. Minutes passed, maybe 5, maybe 20. Time becomes meaningless when you're listening for sounds that might determine whether you live or die. I heard nothing, no more footsteps, No doors opening, no breathing except my own. The house had returned to its baseline symphony of mechanical sounds and settling wood. Eventually, slowly, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. My mind, that desperate thing, constructed a narrative I could survive. I'd been half asleep. The footsteps were a dream, bleeding into waking. The shadow was a trick of the light. I was alone. I was safe. Everything was fine. I didn't believe it. But I needed to believe it. I got out of bed, my bare feet cold against the floor, and walked to my bedroom door. I stood there for a long moment, my hand on the doorframe, peering into the hallway. Nothing. I stepped into the hall, moving toward the kitchen, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. The nightlight cast everything in amber and shadow. I reached the kitchen entrance and fumbled for the light switch. The fluorescent bulbs flickered once, twice, then flooded the room with that harsh, commercial kitchen brightness I'd always hated. I scanned the space quickly. The sink, the stove, the refrigerator, the small breakfast table, the back door. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. The dish towel hung on the oven handle. The coffee maker sat unplugged on the counter. The back door was closed, deadbolt engaged. But there, on the floor, was something that hadn't been there before. Wet footprints. Not puddles, but the distinct outline of bare feet, starting near the back door and walking toward the hallway, toward my bedroom. 4 steps, maybe 5, the water already beginning to evaporate, the edges going dry. I followed them with my eyes, my breath catching. They stopped in the middle of the kitchen floor, right where the linoleum met the hallway carpet. They didn't continue, they didn't turn around. They simply ended, as if whoever had made them had evaporated mid-stride. The back door was locked. I'd checked it before bed, the way I always did, a habit born from living alone. I walked over and examined it, my hands shaking. The deadbolt was engaged. The chain was latched. The door showed no signs of forced entry, no scratches around the lock, no damage to the frame. I looked out the window into the backyard. The motion sensor light was still off, which meant nothing larger than a cat had crossed its path in the last hour. Beyond the fence, the forest was a wall of darkness, impenetrable and watching. I stood there, staring at those footprints, trying to make them make sense. Rain, I thought. Maybe I'd walked through the kitchen earlier after a shower, and the water had somehow stayed on the floor, unnoticed until now. But I hadn't showered since early evening, hours ago, and these prints were fresh, the water still wet enough to reflect the overhead light. I grabbed a dish towel and wiped them up, the cloth coming away damp and cold. Then I checked every door, every window, every possible entry point in the house. Everything was locked. Everything was secure. I was alone. I wanted to call someone, my ex-wife, my brother, even the police. But what would I say? I heard footsteps and found wet footprints in my locked house. They'd tell me the same thing. I was already telling myself. I'd imagined it. I'd been dreaming. I was stressed. I needed sleep. I went back to bed, leaving every light in the house on. I didn't sleep. I lay there, listening, waiting for the footsteps to return. They didn't, but around 4:30 in the morning, just as the first grey light of dawn began, to filter through my curtains, I heard something else. A voice, soft, almost a whisper, coming from somewhere in the house. It was calling my name. The human mind is a desperate thing. It will construct any narrative, no matter how absurd, to avoid accepting what it knows to be true. I spent the next 3 days convincing myself that Halloween night had been an anomaly, a confluence of sleeplessness and suggestion. Maybe I'd had too much coffee. Maybe the true crime podcast I'd been listening to had bled into my subconscious. Maybe I was lonelier than I wanted to admit, and my brain had conjured company, even terrifying company, just to fill the silence. I threw myself into routine: work, gym, groceries, home. I kept the TV on constantly, filling the house with noise. I slept with my bedroom door closed and locked, a chair wedged under the handle. I avoided the kitchen after dark, eating dinner at 5 o'clock, cleaning up immediately, staying in the living room until it was time for bed. But the house had changed, or rather, my perception of it had changed. Spaces that had once felt neutral, forgettable, now carried weight. The kitchen doorway became a threshold I hurried through. The hallway stretched longer in my peripheral vision. The back door seemed to rattle in its frame, even when there was no wind. On the fourth night, I woke to the sound of running water. This time, it was 3:14 a.m. The numbers glowed red on my alarm clock, and I stared at them, my body already tense, already knowing something was wrong. The sound was coming from the kitchen. Water running full force in the sink. I could hear it clearly through my closed door, that distinctive rush and splash of tap water hitting the metal basin. I hadn't left the water on. I was pathologically careful about that, the kind of person who checked the stove 3 times before leaving the house, who turned doorknobs twice to ensure they were locked. There was no way I'd left the tap running. I got out of bed and crept to the door, pressing my ear against it. Yes, definitely running water. And underneath it, something else. A humming sound, low and tuneless, the kind of absent noise someone makes while washing dishes or brushing their teeth. Someone was in my kitchen at 3 in the morning in my locked house. This time, fear transformed into something else. Anger, maybe? Or the kind of desperate courage that comes from having exhausted all other options. I grabbed my phone and the baseball bat I'd started keeping beside my bed, slowly unlocked my bedroom door, and eased it open. The hallway was dark. I'd given up on leaving lights on everywhere. The electric bill had been astronomical, and the brightness had only made the shadows deeper, more defined. But I could see the kitchen from where I stood, see the faint glow that meant the light above the sink was on. I crept forward, the bat raised, my phone clutched in my other hand, with 911 already typed in, my thumb hovering over the call button. With each step, the sound of running water grew louder, and with it, that humming. It was a man's voice, I realized. Deep and steady, humming no particular tune, just a rhythm. I reached the kitchen entrance and looked inside. The tap was running, water gushing into the sink, but there was no one there. The room was empty. The light above the sink cast a small circle of illumination, leaving the corners in shadow, but I could see clearly enough. No one was standing at the sink. No one was standing anywhere. I walked to the sink and turned off the water with shaking hands. The sudden silence was deafening. I looked around the kitchen, my heart pounding, the bat still raised. Nothing. The back door was locked. The windows were closed. I was alone, but the sink was full of water, not just wet, but full, as if someone had put in the stopper and let it fill to the brim. I never used the stopper. I didn't even know where it was. Yet, there it was, seated firmly in the drain, the sink filled almost to overflowing. And there, on the counter beside the sink, was a photograph. It was an old Polaroid, the kind with the white border and the square format, the colors slightly faded. The image showed a man standing in a kitchen, my kitchen, I realized with a jolt. But the photo was old, maybe from the 1980s based on the style. The man was youngish, maybe 30, with dark hair and an easy smile. He was looking directly at the camera, one hand resting on the counter, the other holding what looked like a coffee mug. I'd never seen this photograph before. It hadn't been in the house when I moved in. I didn't know who this man was. I picked it up with trembling fingers, turning it over. On the back, written in blue ink that had faded to almost grey, were 3 words, "Still here." Waiting. The handwriting was neat, careful, the letters slightly cramped as if the writer had been trying to fit the message into a small space. The ink was old. When I ran my finger over it, it didn't smudge. The words set permanently into the paper. I set the photo down and backed away from it, my mind racing. This was impossible. This was someone playing a sick joke. But how had they gotten in? How had they gotten out? How had they known I'd wake up? How had they placed this photo without me hearing, without the cameras seeing? I pulled up the security app and checked both feeds. The front porch showed nothing unusual. The backyard showed nothing unusual. I rewound the footage, watching the last hour in fast forward. Nothing. No movement, no figures, no anomalies. I went back to the kitchen and stared at the photograph. At that smiling man in my kitchen decades ago. The details were so clear. I could see the pattern on his shirt, a blue and white check. I could see the wood grain of the cabinets behind him, the same cabinets that hung in my kitchen now, old and outdated. I could see the window above the sink, the same window I looked out of every day. This photo had been taken in this house, a long time ago, by someone who knew this place intimately. I spent the rest of the night at the kitchen table, the lights on, the bat across my lap, staring at that photograph and trying to understand. When dawn finally came, grey and cold, I'd made a decision. I needed to know who had lived in this house before me. I needed to know who that man was. The property records were public, available through the county assessor's office website. I pulled them up on my laptop that morning, coffee going cold beside me, the photograph face down on the table because I couldn't look at it anymore. The house had been built in 1974. The first owners were a couple named Robert and Patricia Hendricks. They'd owned it until 1989 when it had been sold to a family named the Kowalskis. The Kowalskis owned it until 2003 when it had been purchased by a real estate investment company. After that, it had cycled through a series of renters and short-term owners, finally landing with the property management company I paid rent to now. I stared at the names. Robert Hendricks. Was that him? The man in the photograph? I pulled up his search engine and typed in his name along with Portland, Oregon. The results were sparse. An obituary from 1990, age 37, cause of death, drowning. My stomach dropped. I clicked on the obituary, my hands cold. The text was brief, the kind of minimal notice that runs in newspapers when there's no one left to tell a story. Robert Hendricks, 37, of Portland, died October 31st, 1989. He is survived by his wife, Patricia Hendricks. A private service will be held. In lieu of flowers, donations may be made to the Portland Rescue Mission. October 31st, Halloween, exactly 33 years ago to the day. I searched for more information, diving deeper into archived newspaper, articles, death records, anything I could find. There wasn't much, no news stories, no police reports available online, just that brief obituary and a few mentions in public records. But finally, buried in a forum dedicated to unsolved mysteries, in Oregon, I found a post from 2004. Does anyone remember the drowning on Blackwood Avenue? Halloween night, late 80s, guy drowned in his own kitchen sink. Wife came home and found him. Police ruled it accidental. But how does someone accidentally drown in a sink? Never made sense to me. The post had 3 replies, all from people who vaguely remembered the incident but had no details. The thread had been dead for 20 years. I sat back, my mind reeling. Robert Hendricks had drowned in this kitchen, in the sink I washed my dishes in, on Halloween night. And now, 33 years later to the day, I'd heard footsteps and found wet footprints and woken to running water. This was insane. This was impossible. Ghosts weren't real. Hauntings were fiction. But the photograph sat on my table, and the obituary glowed on my screen, and somewhere deep in my chest, a cold knot of certainty was forming. I needed to talk to Patricia Hendricks. It took me another day to find her. She'd remarried in 1995, becoming Patricia Morland, and moved to a suburb south of Portland. I found a phone number through a people search website, the kind that probably shouldn't exist, but does anyway. I stared at the number for an hour before I called it, rehearsing what I'd say, how I'd explain. She answered on the third ring. Her voice was older, cautious. "Hello, Mrs. Morland. My name is David Carson. I'm renting the house on Blackwood Avenue, the one you used to live in. I'm sorry to bother you, but I found something and I was hoping you might be able to help."
Me understand it. There was a long silence. Then, "What did you find?" I told her about the photograph. I didn't tell her about the footsteps or the running water or the way I'd stopped sleeping. I kept it simple, factual. I found an old photo.
"I want to return it to the family." Another silence. Then quietly, "What does the back say?" I flipped it over, even though I'd memorized the words. "It says, 'Still here, waiting.'" I heard her breath catch. When she spoke again, her voice was tight, controlled. "That's Robert's handwriting. He took that photo the day we moved in. He was so proud of that house. He set the camera up on a timer and stood there like he owned the world." "I'm sorry about what happened to him," I said carefully. "I found his obituary. It must have been terrible. You need to leave that house." Her voice was sharp now, urgent. "Night. Don't stay there another night." My chest tightened. "Why? What happened to him?" "I came home from my sister's place. Late, after midnight. He'd stayed home because he wasn't feeling well. When I got home, all the lights were on and I could hear water running. I found him in the kitchen, face down in the sink. It was full of water, and he was just there, drowned. The police said it was an accident. That's what they said. Heart attack, maybe, fell forward into the water. But David, the sink was full. The stopper was in. Robert never used the stopper, and there were wet footprints all over the floor, leading from the back door to the sink. Bare feet. The back door was locked from the inside. I felt the cold spread from my chest to my limbs. Did they ever figure out who made the footprints? They said it must have been Robert walking around in wet socks or something. But I knew. I'd lived in that house for 15 years, and I knew. Something was in there with us. He'd heard things, seen things. He never wanted to talk about it. Thought I'd think he was crazy, but I knew. And on Halloween night, whatever it was, it killed him. What do you mean he'd heard things? Always footsteps, walking through the kitchen at night. He'd get up to check and there'd be nothing, but he'd hear them clear as day. And sometimes he'd hear his name, like someone calling to him from another room. It started maybe 6 months before he died. Got worse every week. By October, he wasn't sleeping. He was terrified, David. He wouldn't say it, but I could see it.
And then Halloween came and I left him alone and... Her voice broke.
I should never have left him alone. Mrs. Morland, the photograph. Where did you find it? I didn't. I don't know where you found it, but it wasn't me. I moved out of that house 3 days after Robert died and never went back. I didn't take anything except our clothes and some personal items. Everything else I left. I couldn't be in there. I told the bank to deal with it, sold it as soon as I could. But the photograph has his handwriting on the back. I don't know how it got there. But David, please, listen to me. Leave. Don't try to understand it. Don't try to fix it. Just leave. I didn't leave. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But moving takes time and money and explanations, and I had none of those things readily available. I had a lease. I had a security deposit. I had exactly $300 in my checking account and another week until payday. Where would I go? A hotel? For how long? And how would I explain to my landlord that I was breaking the lease because
a man died in the kitchen 33 years ago and now I was hearing footsteps?
I sounded insane even to myself, so I stayed, but I prepared. I bought 3 more security cameras and installed them inside the house, one in the hallway, one in the kitchen, one in the living room. I bought motion sensor lights and put them everywhere. I bought a deadbolt for my bedroom door and installed it myself. I mapped out exit strategies from every room. I kept the baseball bat close, and I waited. For 3 nights, nothing happened. The house was quiet. The cameras recorded. Nothing but me, moving through my space like a prisoner in a cell. I started to feel foolish. Maybe I'd overreacted. Maybe Patricia Morland was just a traumatized widow who'd never processed her grief. Maybe Robert Hendricks had simply died in a freak accident, and coincidence had made it seem like more. On the 4th night, I woke to the sound of my name. It was 2:47 a.m., the exact time I'd first heard the footsteps. The voice was close, intimate, like someone speaking directly into my ear.
David! I bolted upright, my heart exploding in my chest. My bedroom was empty. The new deadbolt was engaged. The chair was still wedged under the handle. I was alone. David. Again, closer, coming from the hallway. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the security feed.
The hallway camera showed nothing. Just the empty corridor, the nightlight glowing, the shadows still. But I could hear it, clear as day. My name, spoken in a voice I didn't recognize. A man's voice. Deep and calm. David, come here. I watched. The camera feed, my breath coming in short gasps. The kitchen camera showed the room empty, dark except for the ambient light from the street. The living room camera showed nothing, but the voice continued, patient, insistent. David, I'm waiting. I should have stayed in my room. I should have called the police. Called anyone. Barricaded myself inside and waited for daylight, but the voice had a quality to it, a pull, like a hook lodged deep in my chest, reeling me forward. I unlocked the deadbolt, moved the chair, and opened my bedroom door. The hallway was freezing, my breath misted in the air, and I could see frost forming on the walls, delicate patterns spreading like veins. The temperature had dropped at least 40 degrees in the span of seconds. I stood there, shivering, watching my breath cloud in front of me. David. Kitchen. I walked forward, my bare feet numb against the frozen floor. The hallway stretched before me, longer than it should have been, the perspective warped and wrong. The nightlight flickered, throwing shadows that moved independently of any source. I reached the kitchen entrance and stopped. The room was full of water. Not flooded. That's not the right word. The water was just there, hanging in the air, suspended like the room had been filled and frozen mid-moment. I could see droplets hanging motionless, reflecting the streetlight from outside. The sink was overflowing, water pouring from the tap, in a continuous stream that went up instead of down, defying gravity, spreading into the air in impossible patterns, and standing in the middle of it all, facing away from me, was a man. He was soaked, water dripping from his clothes, his hair.
Pooling around his bare feet, he stood perfectly still, his head slightly bowed, his shoulders slumped. I knew without seeing his face that it was Robert Hendricks, the same build as the man in the photograph, the same posture. Robert? My voice was barely a whisper. He turned slowly and I saw his face, pale, waterlogged, eyes open but empty, like he was looking through me rather than at me.
Water dripped from his nose, his chin, his fingertips. When he spoke, his voice was the same one that had been calling my name, but now I could see his lips moving, slightly out of sync with the sound. Every Halloween, he said, I come back.
I don't want to. But I'm pulled here. Pulled to this kitchen. To that sink. What happened to you? I drowned. He said it simply, stating a fact.
I was getting a glass of water. I heard something behind me, felt hands on my shoulders, pushing. My face went into the water and the hands held me there. I fought. God, I fought. But they were so strong, and when I finally stopped fighting, when the water filled my lungs, I understood.
Understood what? That I wasn't the first. The house remembers, the ground remembers. Before this house was built, there was another structure here, older, and before that, just land. Wet land, swampy. People drowned here long before there were
houses or sinks or kitchens. The water remembers them. And on Halloween, the boundary gets thin and the water reaches through looking for more. I stared at him, my mind unable to process what I was seeing, what I was hearing. You're saying the house is haunted? By what? By water? By what drowned here? By what the water took? It's hungry, David. And every year it gets stronger. I can feel them now, the others. They're in the water with me. We're all waiting. For
what? He looked at me with those empty eyes. For the next one? For Halloween? For you? Behind him, the suspended water began to move. Ripples spread through it, and I saw shapes forming. Faces, dozens of them, pressing against the surface.
from the inside, mouths open in silent screams.
Hands reached out, grasping, pulling. I didn't want to die, Robert said quietly. I had plans. Patricia and I were going to start a family. I was going to get promoted. We were going to travel. I had so much time. His voice broke slightly.
But the water doesn't care about plans. It only knows hunger. The suspended water began to collapse, falling toward the floor in slow motion. Robert's form started to dissolve with it, his edges blurring, his solidity fading. Leave this house, David, before October, before Halloween, because when it comes, the water will rise again, and it will take you down to where we are. And you'll wait here forever, like me, trying to warn the next one. He was almost gone now, just a vague outline in the falling water. His last words were barely audible. I'm so cold, it's so cold down here. The water hit the floor all at once with a tremendous crash, and I was suddenly drenched, gasping, standing in 2 inches of water that was spreading across the kitchen floor. The room was normal again, no suspended droplets, no impossible physics, no drowned man, just water flooding from the sink, spreading toward the hallway. I ran to the sink and turned off the tap, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the handle. Then I stood there, soaked and freezing, watching the water swirl around my ankles, catching the light from the street. I pulled out my phone with numb fingers and checked the security footage, rewinding to the moment I'd entered the kitchen. The camera showed me walking to the kitchen entrance, standing there for several minutes, staring at nothing, and then rushing forward to turn off the sink. No water in the air, no frozen hallway, no Robert Hendricks. Just me, standing alone, talking to an empty room. But the water on the floor was real. And when I looked down at my soaked clothes, I could see something that made my blood freeze. There were handprints on my shoulders, wet handprints, exactly where someone might grip you if they were trying to push you forward, toward a sink full of water. Story number 2, it was 11:47 p.m. when Sarah's phone died, exactly 13 minutes before midnight on Halloween. She remembers because she'd been checking the time obsessively, counting down the minutes until she could
Reasonably tell her friends she was done, she was going home, she'd fulfilled her social obligation.
The party was in full swing around her, a crush of costumed bodies in what had probably been a nice house before someone decided to throw 100 drunk college students into it. The music was too loud, the air too hot, thick with the smell of cheap beer and artificial fog machine mist. Sarah had never liked Halloween. Even as a child, the holiday had seemed wrong to her, forced, a collective decision to celebrate fear and darkness for no good reason. She didn't understand the appeal of being scared, of dressing as monsters, of decorating with gravestones and skeletons. Fear, in her experience, wasn't something you invited. It found you on its own. But her roommate, Jessica, had insisted, "You can't spend every Halloween alone in your dorm room watching Netflix. It's our senior year. Live a little." So Sarah had agreed, thrown on a half-hearted cat costume, black dress, cat ears from the dollar store, some whiskers drawn with eyeliner, and let Jessica drag her to this party at a house on the edge of campus. She'd lasted 2 hours before. Her phone died mid-scroll, the battery giving up without warning. She sighed, shoved the dead phone into her small crossbody purse, and started looking for Jessica in the crowd. Time to go home. The house was a maze. Victorian maybe, or meant to look Victorian, with too many small rooms connecting to other small rooms, hallways that branched in unexpected directions. Someone had hung orange and purple lights everywhere, casting the whole place in an unsettling glow. Sarah pushed through the living room, checked the kitchen, looked in the den where people were playing beer pong. No Jessica. She climbed the stairs, ignoring the signs someone had posted, second floor private, party below only. She just needed to find her roommate, and then they could leave. The second floor hallway was dimmer, quieter, most of the doors closed. She could still hear the bass thumping from below, but up here it felt muffled, distant. She checked her phone again out of habit, forgetting it was dead. 11:53 p.m., her watch read. 7 minutes. 7 minutes until midnight, until Halloween was technically over, until she could go home and pretend she'd had fun. At the end of the hallway was a door slightly ajar, light spilling from the crack. She heard voices inside, Jessica's laugh distinctive and loud. Thank God. Sarah pushed. The door opened. The room was a bedroom, but not a college student's bedroom. This was furnished, decorated, like someone actually lived here. An older someone. There was a 4-poster bed with a crocheted blanket, a wooden dresser with a doily on top, a rocking chair in the corner. The walls were papered in a faded floral pattern. And standing in the middle of the room, examining an old music box, was a girl in a witch costume, not Jessica. This girl was younger, maybe 19, with long red hair and a green dress that looked expensive, tailored. She turned when Sarah entered, her face breaking into a smile. Oh, good. I was hoping someone else would find this room. Isn't it wild? It's like stepping into a time capsule. Who do you think lived here? Sarah looked around, uneasy. I thought this was a rental house for students. It is, but this room is locked off. Or it's supposed to be. I found it by accident. The door was open. The girl gestured around. Look at this stuff. It's all so old. Genuinely antique. Sarah walked further into the room, her unease growing. Something felt wrong. The air was different in here, cooler, heavier, the oxygen was thicker. And there was a smell, faint but distinct, lavender, and something underneath it, something organic and unpleasant. I'm looking for my friend, Sarah said. I thought I heard her in here. No, just me. I'm Chloe, by the way. The girl extended a hand and Sarah shook it automatically. Chloe's palm was cold, almost clammy. You feel it too, right? How weird this room is? Yeah, we should probably go. This is someone's private space. In a minute, I want to figure out whose room this was. Chloe walked to the dresser and started opening drawers, rummaging through contents. Sarah wanted to stop her, but didn't know how without seeming uptight. In the top drawer, Chloe found a stack of photographs. Old ones, black and white, the edges worn. She spread them on the dresser, examining each one. Look at these. This woman, she's in every photo. I think this was her room. Sarah looked. The woman in the photographs was in her 60s, maybe, with white hair pulled back in a bun, a severe face, thin lips. In every photo she was alone, standing in a garden, sitting in a chair, posing stiffly by a doorway. In none of them was she smiling. She looks miserable, Chloe said. I wonder what her story was. Chloe, seriously, we should leave. This feels invasive. Oh, come on. She's probably dead. It's not like she'll mind. Chloe picked up the music box and wound the key on the bottom. A thin, tinkling melody started to play, discordant and strange. Not a song Sarah recognized. Creepy, right? The melody filled the room, and Sarah felt her skin prickle. "Turn it off." "In a second. I want to see if—" The door slammed shut. Both girls jumped, spinning toward the sound. The door was closed, fully, completely, as if blown by a sudden wind. Except there was no wind. The air in the room was still. "Okay, that was freaky." Chloe laughed, but it sounded forced. "Old houses, right? Weird drafts." Sarah walked to the door and tried the handle. It didn't turn. She tried again, pulling harder. "It's locked." "What? That's impossible. Doors don't lock from the outside." Chloe joined her, both of them pulling on the handle, rattling it. The door didn't budge. "Hello?" Chloe called out. "This isn't funny. Let us out." No response, just the sound of the party continuing below. Oblivious, Sarah pounded on the door. "Help! We're locked in here. Someone open the door." She waited, listening. Nothing. No footsteps.
No response. No one could hear them. "Try your phone," Chloe said. "It's dead." "Of course it is." Chloe pulled out her own phone, the screen glowing in the dim room. "No signal. How is there no signal? We're not in a basement." She walked
Around the room, holding her phone up, trying to find bars.
"Nothing! This is insane!" Sarah looked at her watch. 11:58 p.m. 2 minutes until midnight. The music box was still playing, that same discordant tune, looping over and over. "Turn that off, please." Chloe walked back to the dresser and stopped.
The music box, the sudden silence almost worse than the sound.
"Let's think. We're locked in a room. No phone signal. No one can hear us. What do we do? Break the window?" They both looked at the room's single window. It was old, the frame painted shut, and outside was complete darkness. No streetlights, no moon, just black.
Sarah walked over and tried to open it anyway, pushing against the frame, but it didn't move. The glass was thick, the kind that would be difficult to break without a tool. "We could break the glass," Sarah said. "But then what? We're on the second floor. It's a long drop. Better than staying locked in here." Sarah turned back to the room, examining it more carefully. There had to be another way out. But the room was simple. One door, one window, no other exits. The walls were solid, the floorboards old but intact. They were trapped. The temperature began to drop. Sarah noticed it first, her breath misting slightly in the air. "Do you feel that?" Chloe wrapped her arms around herself. "Why is it getting so cold?" The lights flickered. Once, twice, then steadied. But they were dimmer now, the bulb in the ceiling lamp fading to a weak orange glow. The shadows in the corners of the room grew longer, darker, more defined. And then Sarah saw her. The woman from the photographs was standing in the corner beside the rocking chair. She hadn't been there a moment ago. She was just suddenly there, as if she'd materialized from the shadows. She wore a long, dark dress, her white hair in that same severe bun. Her face was exactly as it had been in the photos. Thin, unsmiling, her eyes fixed on Sarah with an intensity that made Sarah's stomach drop.
"Chloe," Sarah whispered. "Do you see her?" Chloe turned, following Sarah's gaze. She gasped, stumbling backward. "What the fuck is that?" The woman didn't move. She stood perfectly still, her hands clasped in front of her, her expression unchanged.
But her eyes tracked them, following their movements. "This isn't happening," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "This isn't real." The woman's mouth opened, and a voice came out, dry and rustling like dead leaves. "You shouldn't be in my room." Sarah's
heart was hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs.
"We're sorry. We didn't mean to intrude. Please, just let us leave. You opened my things. You touched what's mine. We didn't mean any harm," Chloe said, her voice high and panicked. "We'll put everything back. We'll leave. Please." The woman took a step forward, and Sarah saw that she wasn't quite solid. She was translucent, flickering slightly, like an image projected onto smoke. Another step. Another. She was moving toward them, her eyes never leaving Sarah's face. People always come into my room. They touch my things. They mock me. Even after I died, they wouldn't leave me alone. Her voice was growing louder, sharper. This house was mine. I lived here alone. I wanted peace, but they turned it into this noise and chaos and disrespect. We'll go, Sarah said desperately. Just unlock the door. We'll never come back. You can't leave. The woman was closer now, close enough that Sarah could see the details of her face, the wrinkles around her eyes, the thin line of her mouth, the coldness in her gaze. No one leaves my room on Halloween. That's when the boundary is thinnest. That's when I can keep you. Sarah looked at her watch. 11:59 p.m., 1 minute until midnight. The woman reached out, her translucent hand extending toward Sarah's face. Sarah tried to back away, but she was against the dresser, nowhere to go. The hand touched her cheek, and it was so cold it burned. Sarah screamed. Chloe grabbed the music box from the dresser and threw it at the woman. It passed through her body, shattering against the wall, the mechanism breaking with a discordant crash of notes. The woman turned toward Chloe, her expression transforming into rage. "You dare!" Sarah grabbed Chloe's arm and pulled her toward the window. "Break the glass, now!" Chloe picked up the rocking chair, struggling with its weight, and swung it toward the window. It bounced off, the glass not even cracking. She tried again, putting all her strength into it. Nothing. The glass held firm. Behind them, the woman was growing larger, darker, her form expanding to fill the room. Her voice boomed, echoing off the walls. "You will stay. You will join me, forever trapped in this room, as I am trapped." Sarah looked at her watch again. Midnight. Halloween was over, and with midnight came a sound from outside the door. Footsteps running up the stairs. A voice calling, "Sarah, are you up here?" Jessica. Sarah pounded on the door with both fists, screaming, "Jessica, we're in here! Open the door!" "Sarah, where are you?" "The door at the end of the hall, help us!" She heard Jessica try the handle, heard her curse. "It's locked. Hold on, I'll get—"
Something to... The door exploded inward, splintering off its hinges.
Jessica stood there, a fire extinguisher in her hands, staring wide-eyed at the scene inside the room. Sarah and Chloe bolted through the doorway, stumbling into the hallway. Sarah turned back for one last look. The room was empty. No old woman. No translucent figure. Just an ordinary bedroom, dim and dusty, with a broken music box on the floor and photographs scattered on the dresser. "What the hell happened?" Jessica demanded, looking between them. "I heard you screaming." Sarah couldn't speak. Her whole body was shaking, adrenaline coursing through her. Chloe was leaning against the wall, breathing hard, her face pale. "We need to leave," Sarah finally managed. "Right now, we need to leave this house." They ran down the stairs, pushing, through the crowd, ignoring the confused looks and questions. Out the front door, into the cold night air, down the sidewalk, away from that house, away from that room. It wasn't until they were 3 blocks away, stopped at a corner under a streetlight, that Sarah looked at her watch again. 12:07 a.m. November 1st, Halloween was over. She looked down at her hands and saw that they were shaking. And on her left cheek, where the woman's hand had touched her, was a mark. A handprint, pale white against her skin, cold to the touch. It didn't fade. Not that night, not the next day. Sarah went to a doctor who said it was probably a cold burn, maybe frostbite, and prescribed cream. But weeks later, the mark was still there, fainter but visible. A reminder. She never went back to that house. She heard later that the landlord had permanently locked the room on the 2nd floor, the one at the end of the hall, after complaints from multiple tenants. They said it was for insurance reasons, structural issues, but Sarah knew better. Some rooms aren't meant to be entered. Some boundaries, especially on Halloween, are meant to stay closed. And some dead, no matter how long they've been gone, still believe the space they occupied in life belongs to them in death. Story. Number 3, it was 1:13 a.m. when Marcus realized he was lost, exactly 73 minutes after he'd entered the corn maze. The Riverside Farm Halloween corn maze was legendary in their town, a sprawling 10 acres of twisted paths cut through 8-foot-tall stalks. People came from counties away to test themselves against it, especially on Halloween night when the farm stayed open until 2 in the morning, and legend said the maze was at its most challenging. Marcus had been hearing about it for years, how people got lost for hours, how the paths seemed to shift, how the darkness between the stalks felt alive. He'd gone in with his girlfriend Amy and another couple, Jake and Lauren. They'd been drinking, not drunk, but buzzed enough to be brave,
laughing as they entered the maze at midnight, confident they'd be out in 20 minutes.
They'd made it maybe 5 minutes before Jake suggested they split up, make it interesting, see who could find the center first. It was a stupid idea. Marcus knew it was stupid even as he agreed, even as he watched Amy and Lauren head down the left path while he and Jake took the right. But it was Halloween, and they were 24 years old, and stupidity was part of the fun. 10 minutes later, Marcus had lost Jake too. One moment his friend was ahead of him, calling back some joke, and the next moment he'd turned a corner and vanished. Marcus had followed, but the path just led to another split and another, and now he was alone, surrounded by walls of dried corn stalks that rustled in a wind he couldn't quite feel. He pulled out his phone. No signal, which wasn't surprising. The farm was rural, cell service was spotty, but his phone's flashlight worked, and he had a compass app. The exit was supposed to be on the south side. He could navigate by compass, find his way out, except when he opened the compass app, the needle was spinning, not pointing north, not pointing anywhere, just rotating slowly, endlessly, like it couldn't find magnetic north. Shit. He shook his phone, closed the app, reopened it. Still spinning. Fine, I'll just follow the left wall. That was the rule, right? In any maze, if you followed one wall continuously, eventually you'd find the exit. It might take longer, but it would
work.
He put his left hand against the corn stalks and started walking, his phone's light illuminating a small circle ahead of him. The corn felt wrong under his palm. Too dry, brittle, like it might crumble into dust at any moment. And it was cold, far colder than the night air, which had been mild, almost warm. His breath was starting to mist. He walked for what felt like 10 minutes, following the left wall, making turn after turn. The path never seemed to straighten. It was all curves and corners, the stalks pressing in close on both sides, and he wasn't hearing anything anymore. No distant voices, no laughter, no sounds of other people in the maze, just the rustling of corn and the sound of his own footsteps. "Amy!" he called out. His voice sounded flat, absorbed by the corn, not carrying the way it should. "Jake! Lauren!" No response. He kept walking, his unease growing. This was taking too long, even following. The wall, he should have reached an exit or at least heard something by now. The farm couldn't be that big. He checked his watch. 1:13 a.m. He'd been in here for an hour and 13 minutes. That's when he saw the scarecrow. It was positioned in the middle of an intersection where 3 paths met, mounted on a wooden post, arms outstretched. It wore tattered clothes, jeans, a flannel shirt, and a burlap sack over its head with a crude face drawn in black marker. Its body was stuffed with straw, some of it spilling from tears in the fabric. Marcus had seen scarecrows throughout the maze.
On his way in.
The farm had dozens of them, part of the Halloween atmosphere, but this one felt different. He couldn't say why. Something about its posture, the angle of its head, the way the drawn face seemed to be looking directly at him despite having no eyes. He walked past it, choosing the left path to stay consistent with his strategy, but he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He glanced back. The scarecrow was still there, unmoving, but in the dim light from his phone, he could have sworn it had shifted slightly, turned a few degrees, following his movement. "Stop it," he muttered to himself. "It's a decoration. It's not moving." Walked faster, taking turn after turn, his left hand never leaving the wall of stalks. But something was wrong. He was seeing the same features repeated, the same tight corners, the same width of path. And then, after another turn, he was back at the intersection. The scarecrow was still there, in the exact same position. No, that wasn't possible. He'd been following the left wall continuously. There was no way he could have doubled back. Unless the paths were changing. He stood there, staring at the scarecrow, his heart rate climbing. This wasn't funny anymore. This wasn't fun. He needed to get out. He pulled out his phone and tried calling Amy. No signal. He tried texting. The message
Failed to send. He opened the compass app again while still spinning. Fuck this.
He chose the right path this time, the opposite of before, walking quickly, not running, but close to it. The cold was getting worse. He could see frost forming on the corn stalks now, delicate patterns of ice crystals spreading along the dried leaves. His breath clouded thick in front of him. After 3 more turns, he found himself back at the scarecrow.
No, this isn't. He walked past it, took the middle path, the one he hadn't tried yet. 4 turns, 5. Back at the scarecrow, he was trapped in a loop. No matter which path he chose, no matter how he navigated, he kept returning to this intersection, to this scarecrow, to this wrong place. Marcus backed away from the intersection, his back against the corn.
His phone's battery was at 40%. If he ran out of light, if he was stuck in this maze in total darkness, he heard footsteps. Not his. Someone else was walking in the maze, their steps crunching on the dry ground. Marcus spun toward the buyer, sound, his light sweeping across the stalks. "Hello, Amy, is that you?" The footsteps continued, steady, rhythmic, coming from somewhere to his left. He moved toward them, pushing through the intersection, following the sound. "Hey, wait, I'm lost!" He turned a corner and saw a figure walking ahead of him, tall, wearing what looked like a dark coat, moving with purpose. Marcus felt a surge of relief. Someone else was in here, someone who might know the way out. "Hey!" he called, jogging to catch up. "Excuse me, can you help me? I think I'm lost." The figure didn't respond, didn't turn around, just kept walking. Marcus followed, getting closer. He could see more details now. It was a man, definitely broad-shouldered, wearing what looked like old clothes. Work clothes, maybe. Boots that left deep impressions in the dirt. "Sir? Hello?" The man turned down another path and Marcus followed, almost running now. "Please, I just need to know how to get out. I've been in here for—" He rounded the corner and stopped dead. The man was gone. The path ahead was empty, stretching straight for 30 feet before turning again. There was nowhere he could have gone, no side paths, no gaps in the corn. He'd simply vanished. Marcus stood there, his chest heaving, his mind trying to process what he'd just seen. Then slowly, he turned around. The scarecrow was behind him. It was standing in the middle of the path, not mounted on a post, but standing on its own, its burlap sack head tilted slightly to one side. The crude, drawn face, 2 X's for eyes, a stitched line for a mouth, seemed to be regarding him. "This isn't real," Marcus whispered. "You're not real." The scarecrow took a step forward. Marcus heard the sound clearly. The rustle of straw, the thump of a boot on dirt. It took another step. Another. Walking toward him with jerky, unnatural movements like a puppet being pulled by strings. Marcus ran. He didn't care about strategy anymore, didn't care about following walls or maintaining direction. He just ran. His phone light bouncing wildly, illuminating flashes of corn and dirt and darkness. Behind him, he could hear the scarecrow following, its footsteps heavy and steady, never speeding up, but never stopping. He took random turns, left, right, straight, trying to lose it. His lungs burned, his legs ached, but the footsteps behind him continued, relentless. He burst into another intersection, this one with 4 paths, and skidded to a stop. There were scarecrows in each direction, 4 of them, mounted on posts, all facing toward him, all wearing burlap sacks with that same crude, drawn face. The footsteps behind him stopped. Marcus turned slowly. The scarecrow that had been chasing him was standing at the entrance to the intersection, 10 feet away, its head tilted, watching. "What do you want?" Marcus's voice was hoarse, broken. "What is this?" The 4 scarecrows on the posts began to move, their heads turned, all facing him now. Then their arms creaking and rustling, lowering from their outstretched positions, pointing at him. Marcus's phone battery hit 10%, and the low-power warning appeared on his screen. He looked at it, then back at the scarecrows. 5 of them now, surrounding him, closing in. "I'm sorry," he said, not knowing why he was apologizing, but feeling like he should. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to trespass. I didn't mean to—" The scarecrow that had been chasing him reached up and pulled off its burlap sack. Underneath was a face, not human, but not quite something else. Pale, sunken, with eyes that were too large and too dark. The mouth was a slash, lipless, revealing teeth that looked like they'd been carved from wood. "Every year," it said, its voice like wind through dead leaves, "someone gets lost in the maze, someone who stays past midnight, someone who doesn't respect the boundaries, and every year they join us." The 4 scarecrows on the posts pulled off their sacks. More faces, different, but all wrong, all impossible. Marcus realized with horror that they weren't stuffed with straw. They were stuffed with something else, something that had once been human. "You can't keep me," Marcus said, backing toward the center of the intersection. "People know I'm here. They'll look for me." "They
Always look," the first scarecrow said. "They never find. The maze keeps what the maze takes."
Marcus's phone died, the screen going black. The sudden darkness was absolute, complete, crushing. He couldn't see anything, couldn't orient himself. He could only hear the rustling of straw, the heavy footsteps, the raspy breathing of the things that surrounded him. Hands grabbed him, cold hands, rough like burlap, strong like iron. He screamed, thrashing, but they held him tight, lifting him, carrying him. He felt straw, stuffing into his mouth, his throat, choking his screams, felt his body being pulled apart and pushed back. Together, the last thing Marcus thought before his thoughts became something else entirely was that he should have left the maze before midnight. That boundaries exist for a reason, that Halloween is when the harvest comes due. They found Marcus's phone on the morning of November the 1st, lying in the dirt near the center of the maze. The battery was completely dead. There was a text message in the draft folder, never sent, time stamped at 1:47 a.m. "Help lost, can't find way out, something following." Marcus himself was never found. The search went on for 3 days, involving police, volunteers, search dogs. They combed every inch of the maze, the surrounding fields, the forest beyond. Nothing. It was as if he'd simply vanished. The farm shut down the corn maze after that, claiming insurance issues. But people in the town knew. They'd heard the stories. For years. People who'd gotten lost, people who'd stayed too long, people who'd entered after midnight on Halloween and never came out. And if you went to the farm now, at night, and walked to where the maze used to be, you'd see something standing in the field. Scarecrows, dozens of them, more than anyone remembered the farm having. They stand in rows, facing the road, their burlap sack heads tilted as if listening. Locals avoid the farm on Halloween night. They've learned that some games aren't meant to be played, some mazes aren't meant to be solved, and some harvests demand more than corn. I still think about David, Sarah, and Marcus. 3 people, 3 different Halloween nights, 3 encounters, with something that shouldn't exist but does. The rational part of my mind wants to dismiss these stories, to find logical explanations, but I've spoken to David. I've seen the photograph he found, touched the paper, felt how wrong it was. I've met Sarah and seen the faded handprint on her cheek that never quite disappeared. And I've driven past the riverside farm and felt the way the scarecrows watch the road, their drawn faces tracking movement. These stories are true. I don't know how they're true, or why, or what rules govern the things that happen on Halloween night. But I know that boundaries blur on that night, that the dead press closer to the living, that houses remember their tragedies and places hold on to their violence. David moved out of the house on Blackwood Avenue in January, forfeiting his security deposit, unwilling to spend another October in that kitchen. He lives in an apartment now on the 5th floor of a modern building with no history, no past residents who drowned in their sinks. He still hears footsteps sometimes late at night and wakes to find his bathroom sink full of water, but he's learning to live with it, learning that some hauntings follow you. Sarah graduated, moved to another state, started a career. She covers the handprint with makeup most days, but she can always feel it, a cold spot on her skin. She doesn't celebrate Halloween anymore, doesn't go to parties, doesn't answer the door for trick-or-treaters. She stays home, doors locked, lights off, waiting for the night to pass, and Marcus's family still leaves flowers at the farm at the edge of where the maze used to be. Every November. First, without fail, they're not sure if he's dead or taken or transformed into something else. They only know he didn't come home. I'm telling you these stories because Halloween is coming again, because every year people forget. They think the holiday is harmless, commercial, fun. They don't remember that it began as Samhain, a night when the veil between worlds grew thin, when offerings were left to appease the dead, when respect was paid to powers we no longer remember. So when Halloween comes, be careful. Don't enter houses you don't know. Don't open doors that should stay closed. Don't wander into mazes after midnight. And if you hear footsteps in an empty room, if you feel a cold hand on your shoulder, if you see something watching you from the corn, don't rationalize it. Don't convince yourself it's nothing. Run, because some nights the boundary between the living and the dead disappears entirely. And on those nights, the dead aren't always content to stay where they belong. They remember being alive. They remember warm kitchens and locked rooms and autumn fields. And they want those things back, even if it means taking them from you. I still live in my house, but I never enter the kitchen after 2:47 a.m. I've learned that lesson. I've learned that some times belong to the dead, and the wise among us let them have it. This Halloween, remember that. Lock your doors, stay away from strange places, and whatever you do, don't tempt the boundary, because eventually, inevitably, the boundary will tempt you back, and when it does, you might not make it home.